When I was first asked to speak, I thought of talking about an Indian village where I lived and worked. But when Mrs. Hudson gave her interesting talk about South India, I thought I must think of something else. I decided to speak about a journey I made from Bombay to Japan, but on reflection, this would not entail any religious aspect. So finally I thought I would speak of religions in the countries on my journey, though I can only briefly mention them. I was travelling on a French ship and shared a cabin with a nice American woman who was a journalist. First, India. The most prominent religion here is Hinduism, and they have many gods and festivals. Often, about the time of our Lent, there is a festival called Holi, Holi. This is a fertility festival, and no self-respecting European would go out on that day. Later on is the festival of a god called Gunpat. The story connected with him is that the father of a family had to go on a journey and was away for some time. On his return, he did not recognize his small son, who tried to prevent him from entering the house as his mother was bathing. The father, in anger, cut off the child's head, and when he realized what he had done, he said that he would cut off the head of the first person who came that way and put it on the body of his son. The first thing which came was an elephant, and so this is the elephant god. Hindus have an image of him in their houses during the festival, which is kept for several days and then ceremoniously thrown into a lake or river. It probably seems fantastic to us that an educated person could believe such a tale, and older people have said to me that their grandchildren do not hold the old beliefs. The Hindu rings a bell when he enters his temple, having left his sandals at the door. He makes obeisance to the god and leaves an offering of rice, coconut, or flowers. There is the caste system in Hinduism, 4 castes and outcasts also. The Hindu also believes in transmigration of souls and that he will come back to this life again after death. The Mohammedans follow the Prophet Muhammad. They have 5 precepts which they must follow. 1. There is one God, Allah. 2. They must pray 5 times daily, turning towards Mecca. 3. Alms must be given, a certain proportion of their income, and this is not for the upkeep of the mosque. 4. They must keep their feast of Ramadan, the meaning of which is that one comes to peace through submission. 5. Every Mohammedan, if at all possible, must visit Mecca in his lifetime. I understand that today the cost of going from England is £2,000. Generally, only the men go to the mosque, but very often there's a special room for the women and another one for children to be taught. The men pray kneeling on the ground on a prayer mat and bending from the waist, which means that their bottoms are rather high up in the air. When women pray, they must keep their bottoms down. Women wear what is called a burqa. This is an enveloping black garment with only a net piece for the woman to see through. The reason is that no one other than her husband can look upon her body. You may remember when the Queen went to the Middle East, she wore a trouser suit. Mohammedans cannot eat pork and mustn't drink wine, and the men can have up to 4 wives if they wish. Then there are the Parsis. These are people who came north from Persia and settled in India. They worship fire, and their places of worship are called fire temples. The fire is maintained continuously in an inner chamber of the temple by priests who wear special protective cloths over their mouth to prevent contamination of pure fire. Worshippers come to the threshold with their offerings and receive in return ashes of the sacred fire. I have often seen Parsis raise their hat to the sun. Because they worship fire, they never have cremation, because that would pollute that which they worship. Instead, when someone dies, the body is taken to the gate of the Towers of Silence, as it is called. Their priest receives it, takes it to a small single-roomed hut where the body is washed. It is then placed on a grill covered with a white cloth and left to the vultures. There is usually running water beneath. When I stayed in Bombay, I had to pass the Towers of Silence on my way to church on a Sunday morning, and sometimes I saw the vultures on trees, so replete that they could not fly. One morning 3 people came to see me, whom I discovered were 2 brothers and their niece. It was to tell me that a younger niece had been raped, and they wanted somewhere for her to stay during her pregnancy, and where the baby could be delivered, and then adoption arranged. They had been to various places in Bombay, where 1 or 2 perhaps of their needs could be met, but they had found nowhere who could do it all. Then they heard of our hospital, and I told them that I could do all 3 of their requests. A few years later, when this girl was to be married, I was invited to the wedding and was given a beautiful gold-coloured sari to wear, with material to make the long skirt to wear beneath and a blouse. I thought of the parable of the guests invited to a wedding and being given a wedding garment. Some years ago, Jews came from Baghdad and settled down the west coast of India and intermarried with Hindus. These people are called Bene Israelites, and the true Jew will not allow them into their synagogue. But I believe most, if not all, have now returned to Israel. When we had a Bene Israelite patient, she always went home on the 7th day to prepare for the circumcision on the 8th. I have often been invited to such a ceremony, and was very privileged to be allowed right into the body of the synagogue. Women usually had to sit at the back behind a partition. The baby is placed on a cushion on the lap of the most prominent male member of the family. His hands and legs are loosely secured by a bandage. The rabbi uses a knife, and I think the result is rather better than when done in hospital with scissors. I noticed he had some Dettol and something which looked like dandelion fluff, but which I was told was a hemostat. The rabbi always carefully asks whether there is any bleeding and whether the baby has passed urine. The first time I saw a circumcision, I marvelled how quiet the baby was, and I asked whether he had been given anything. Oh yes, they said, we give brandy. As you may imagine, Christians in India are a small minority, except perhaps in the south, where incidentally literacy is about 85%, whereas in most other places it is only about 20%. The reason is that when the Portuguese came to South India, where they built a church, they built a school. In India, these people are called Goanese, and there used to be a little section on the west coast called Goa, but this was taken over in India some time ago, perhaps in the 60s. I went from India first to Ceylon, where in addition to Hindus there are Buddhists. From Ceylon we called it Bangkok, where again there are Buddhists. I did a tour of all the wats, as they are called, that is, temples. One I remember especially is the Temple of the Emerald Buddha, as it was quite close to the palace of the King and Queen, where The King and I was filmed. This had in it a beautiful emerald Buddha. Another thing which I noticed in the temples, where of course most people kneel or sit on the floor, was that there were teapots placed on the carpet, warmly wrapped, where pilgrims could help themselves to a drink. From Bangkok I went to Hong Kong, and here there are Buddhists and also Chinese, many of whom had come from China in sampans at night. Well, the Buddha was born about 563 BC, just inside the border of what is now Nepal. Born a prince, brought up in luxury, he married and had a son. It was predicted that he would give up the world to become an ascetic if ever he were to become acquainted with facts of old age, sickness and death, or if he were to see a recluse. Despite precautions, he did perceive the facts of suffering, and the sight of a wandering ascetic fired in him the idea of renouncing the world in order to discover the secret and cure of suffering. He stole away from his family one night and became a recluse. He went to yogis and teachers, but he got no satisfaction. Then he received enlightenment. He put himself in a trance, and during the night he passed through 8 stages of meditation, and now he was a Buddha. He was subjected to temptation from someone called Mara, who is comparable to Satan. The practical side may be summed up in the Noble Eightfold Path. 1 are right views, then right aspirations, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood and right effort, right mindfulness and right contemplation. In addition, there are 5 precepts. 1, to remain from taking life, including animal, refrain from taking what is not given, that is stealing, refrain from wrong sexual relations, fornication or adultery, refrain from the wrong use of speech, not just lying, but malicious gossip as well. These rules are for everyone. The monks had additional ones. They couldn't own property except clothes and a begging bowl, and they were enjoined to be celibate. They quite often in their contemplations would think of perhaps a blue flower and meditate on that. The Buddha died at 80 of a digestive ailment. Sometimes when one's travelling, we came across a wall in the middle of a path, and on the side of the wall were the words Mani Padme Hum, which means hail to the jewel and the lotus. And this wall always heralded the approach of a monastery, so pilgrims knew that they could soon have rest and refreshment. The Chinese religion is formed by 3 main sources. First, the ancient religion given new impetus by Confucius. The second is Taoism, which provides mystical interpretation of the world. And the third, Buddhism, penetrated into China. Confucius was born in 551 BC, perhaps from an aristocratic family, though he was said to be poor. He wanted to revolutionize the world by education. He worked in schools, and his growing reputation gave him ministerial posts. Higher social ethic of China shaped by him, and the art of divination by throwing sticks and watching how they fell. The master said, respectfulness without the rule of propriety becomes a laborious bustle. Carefulness without the rules of propriety becomes timidity. Boldness without the rules of propriety becomes insubordination. Straightforwardness without the rules of propriety becomes rudeness. He worked to combat social injustice and unnecessary suffering. The educational process should aim at the production of a mode of life which reflects and expresses the virtue and harmony he was concerned with. Sometimes he referred to it as the way of heaven. He had belief in a supreme providential being. He condemned human sacrifice, which was a dying practice, though it had been practiced in earlier times. Taoism. The Taoist was concerned with an inner intuitive enlightenment, which was different from the scholarly knowledge shown by the Confucians. The aim of a wise man is to attain harmony, an awareness of the peace and beauty of nature. The mystic strove to empty his mind, so that in this religion he was rather close to Buddhism. Now, of course, that Marxism has flooded the country, and that is a very viable force. Then we went to Manila in the Philippines. It's the only Christian place in the Orient, and Christianity is about 95%. It is said that a Filipino is born with a guitar in his hand. Then from Manila, the ship took us to Japan, and I got off the ship at Kobe and did 5 days on my own and rejoined the ship at Yokohama. I went first from Kobe to Kyoto, where there is a Shinto shrine. It's a completely wooden, large temple. It was the early religion of Japan, and there's a strong insistence on a strong feature of this is the insistence on purity by ritual washing and bathing. And the mirror which one often sees in the temple reflects clearly and so stands for honesty and sincerity. And there's a connection between the religious and moral and social life. Birth and death are thought to be polluting, so that children born in a special hut away from the main dwelling. The Shinto shrine abolished hereditary priesthood. Then there is also ancestor worship, and there's quite often a little shelf in Japanese houses which is their shrine in the room, and we were warned not to put handbags on that.